And here we go. All right, so welcome. We have Dr. Rick Gatto and Dr. Larry Zacharies. How are you guys
Doing
today?
Great.
Excited to have. I've been lucky enough to do some podcasts with both of you. I've been lucky enough, Rick, to know you for a very long time, and Larry, I've gotten to know you pretty well in the last year or so. Two amazing guys that have such great knowledge in this space. So this webinar is the future of work in higher education. I'll have these gentlemen introduce themselves, although I think they don't need introduction in just a couple of minutes. But this webinar is part of an SPD video series that's really highlighting some of the great things we do in the School of Professional Development and at Stony Brook overall. This is maybe the 7th or 8th one that we've done of these through the School of Professional Development. This is so far the most popular so far as the webinar attendance goes. So that's really great to see. And I think it's probably because of both of you and the expertise that you have and the experience that you have in this space. Some of the things we're going to explore the landscape of higher education, have a conversation with both Rick and Larry. We're going to start to understand what skills are sort of necessary to succeed in this sort of new era in higher ed, and how we sort of attract talent, as well as look at and understand the shift to remote hybrid working environments, and have sort of empathy and understanding of what that means to all the stakeholders involved. I just want to do a quick thank you to Pat Malone, who is our Commander-in-Chief in the School of Professional Development, and she is the one that allowed me to come to her with this crazy idea a year or so ago, and it's been really fun. So thank her, and thank Kim Jackalone as well for a lot of the social media stuff and the marketing stuff. That's all Kim. So thank you to Kim as well. So we have with us Rick, who is the Vice President of Student Affairs, and we have Larry, who is the Vice President for Enterprise Risk Management. I'll let both of you just sort of start off with your roles and your experience in higher ed. We'll start off with Rick, and then we'll go to Larry.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll appreciate it. So I've been in the field now, I can't believe it, 28 years, even though I'm 28 years old. And most of my career has actually been here at Stony Brook. I'm just celebrating my 20th year here. And it's been a really interesting and it's just an amazing kind of career ride for myself, and just thinking through all the different opportunities through many different campuses. I'll just quickly share. I was a business major in college, decided to go the corporate route a bit, didn't seem to work out. Like we all do, went back to a mentor who was really important in my life and said, what is this higher ed thing? And she recommended a grad program. And so I wound up going to University of Vermont. And ultimately my career path took me into professional work and residential life, which was a really amazing starting point in higher ed. Lots of opportunity to learn and grow. And then after 4 years in that role, I actually shifted into the academic advising world, which is something that I thought I wouldn't do, but realized how much I love that. And then after doing that for about 4 years, came to Stony Brook in 2002 as Director of Academic Advising, and had really done a lot of academic work for many years. Then expanded the focus on our Finish in 4 graduation efforts. And oddly enough, I've shared this with some of you before, that when I was in my grad program at Vermont, I remember meeting the Vice President for Student Affairs at Vermont, a woman by the name of Rosalind Andreas. And I said, I want to be you someday. And then life happened and 20 plus years went by. And sure enough, 4 years ago, I was asked to serve as the interim Vice President of Student Affairs. And so life sometimes comes full circle. And I've had just an amazing experience in this role. We have about 250 team members as part of Student Affairs here at Stony Brook, covering lots of areas, everything from our health and wellness sphere to our career experiential learning area, our residential life area, and everything about the student experience outside of the classroom. So grateful to have had the chance to be at Stony Brook this long, and glad to be with you tonight too.
Thank you so much, Rick. Larry.
Good evening, everyone. For those that I haven't had the pleasure of either working with or teaching with in the SPD, my name is Larry Zacharies. I've been here at Stony Brook in this latest portion of my tenure for about 12 and a half years, but I actually started many moons ago. I won't say how many. I'm 28, just like Rick. So I came to paramedic school here actually in the early 90s. And after graduating there, worked as a paramedic at the hospital. But my connection to Stony Brook really never was never cut, was never severed, and all roads led to, it stayed with Stony Brook and led back to Stony Brook as I ventured out into various aspects of my career in law enforcement and emergency management, eventually going to law school along the way. After paramedic school, I actually began to teach in the paramedic program. For about 10 years, I was on faculty there. And along the way, I was on faculty in the School of Health Technology and Management in the Bachelor of Science program. I did some undergraduate course design and some curriculum design, and then actually wound up teaching some of the classes. Always had a passion for being in the classroom. My students know that someday that's all I'll do. And as Al and Rick know, I'll just do podcasts and teach someday. But my current role is actually, I'm coming up on the 6-month mark as the Vice President for Enterprise Risk, which is a new position, sorely needed, long ago needed position at Stony Brook, which consolidates some of the traditional structural pieces of public safety and risk and environmental health and safety with the added, I'll say, responsibilities and the added mission of building a traditional risk management function within the university, which a lot of that is rooted in insurance and risk associated with business decisions, but also a little bit more globally, how we work with our colleagues in procurement and finance and athletics and the compliance pieces and how they all work together. So I'm about 5 months into this journey, still putting a team together. Shameless plug, keep an eye on the Stony Brook jobs. There's a few jobs I'll be posting, looking for, and would love to be able to recruit some alum, certainly from our program. So I'm excited to be here, excited to work with Rick. He and I have done several podcasts along the way, certainly during COVID, and it's going to be a good discussion. So thanks for being here and thanks for having me.
Thanks, both of you, for being here. And both of you have high-level positions, and I have to say, knowing both of you personally, two of the most well-rounded, knowledgeable, grounded guys you ever want to meet. So kudos to you for who you are and what you do. So we really want to start to get into, and by the way, you can use the Q&A. Those of you there, Rick and Larry have generously offered their time after we go through the initial sort of interview phase of both of them, or conversation phase. We'll look at your Q&A questions, and we'll be able to answer some of those hopefully if time allows, we'll be able to answer some of those. So use that Q&A and put in your questions as they're talking, and we'll get to them as many as we can right after we talk. So Rick, the first question for you, obviously we've seen a lot of changes this past year, and just Larry, your position was done in 6 months. Some of these new positions that are coming out, some COVID inspired, some not, but it's sort of constantly changing this landscape. What is it in your mind? And for the audience, we'll be asking one person the question, but then the other person will have an opportunity to respond too. So just we'll have somebody lead that question, then we'll have the opportunity for a good conversation around that as far as the format goes. Rick, what does the landscape of higher education look like now, currently?
So when we were talking about that question, it made me think about, obviously, COVID's a demarcation that I think it's a pre and post COVID, but let me kind of take a step back, not even looking at COVID for a minute, and just thinking about landscape of higher ed in terms of what is our fundamental purpose of higher education. Because I think as we look at the landscape of higher ed, there are many strengths that we have, across the country, but there are also a lot of challenges and a lot of threats to the institution of higher education that we need to manage. And so, and not that I'm going to start with an idealistic point of view, because I think I like us to think about, why are we all here? Why do we want to pursue higher education as a profession, as encouraging people to come to college and earn a degree? And I like to think that we all want to learn for learning's sake, and that we want to be a more educated society, that there are these general ideals that we as citizens want to help achieve. And so I like us to think that, even though I think that's faded over time, I still always hope that when people go to college and want to join the field of higher ed, that is something that's a true value that they hold. But In the other regard, I think in the more practical side of things, we've seen higher ed have major upheavals, COVID included, and particularly in higher ed, if you look obviously over the last 10 or 15 years, the exponential increase in the cost of higher education. We're at $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. There are a lot of things weighing on higher ed. So really, I think the question that a lot of consumers are asking, what's the value proposition of earning a degree? Is it worth the time, money, all that investment to get a degree? And I think for the first time in the history of higher ed, it's really being questioned. It's absolutely under the microscope now like it never has before. And then you add the dimension of COVID into that, which I think obviously for all of us, I'm sure if anybody working in higher ed or been part of the organization over this time, another major upheaval. And so it's interesting, on the one hand, the landscape of higher ed is often one that's unchanging, that sits mired in conversation without decisions being made, which I think has affected how higher ed's perceived by the public. Yet COVID, on the other hand, it's so fascinating, it forced an immediate change. So this notion that higher ed's inflexible and they can't pivot on something, they can't move quickly. On March 10th, 2020, that all changed. And so I think that I look at it in a positive way, that that's an indication, a sign that higher ed, if forced to change, will change and does change. So the question is, right, what happens going forward? I know we'll talk about that more in the conversation, but I do like to think that we want higher ed to persist because we want to be educated, but know that we still have to provide value to students in terms of their career aspirations, graduate school. We have to give fundamental skills that students can develop that our employers and others want to see. So there are tensions there that we still have to work through, but I do think higher ed will persist with changes along the way.
Yeah, and the important part, there are a lot of important parts of what you're saying, but one of the biggest things is that these conversations are happening. There is an awareness of this shift, of this need to sort of shift and make sure that we're relevant to consumers, right? I'll turn it over to you, Larry. Anything to add?
Rick really just is a very complete and very honest answer, but I'll just add two things. One of which is COVID, sort of the lens of COVID, in that I agree that higher ed was tested, and I think categorically across the board, there's certainly places where it wasn't the case, but for the most part, it's proven itself to be resilient, and it's proven itself to be nimble in its responding to students' needs, whether it's teaching modality, whether it's supporting student relief efforts. There are a laundry list of things that Stony Brook and other peer institutions had to do in order to, in our case, bring our students home from abroad, right? That's how we first got into the COVID business, then manage their needs initially, and then manage the ever-changing responses to the guidance that we had. And we were, certainly the largest public higher ed in the country, had unique needs, but other places had needs as well. So I think not only has higher ed proven it's going to be around, I think our students have proven that, for the most part, that they want to continue to learn, that they understand the value of higher ed, perhaps even more now than ever, because the market's going to change. I don't want to steal our own thunder. We're going to get into some of this and how the landscape in general looks, but the market's going to change, and the way that students will be able to compete in that market is by continuing to keeping in mind all of the costs associated and things like that. But in order to be competitive, continuing education, professional education, and the pursuit of higher education is clearly going to be a part of that package. So,
and I want to get to this next question too. And Larry, if you could sort of lead this one, but you're both really a key part of the HEA program, and I'm highlighting this because based on what you both have talked about, it's going to take strong leaders, whether those leaders that are there already or those incoming leaders. And you're both a big part. We have some of our students from the HEA program here at Stony Brook University. To you first, Larry, what are you seeing in terms of the types of folks pursuing higher ed administrative opportunities? Because I just want to say a caveat here is it happens in K-12, but it also happened. Larry just went dark for a second there, and it's also happening in higher ed. People are kind of timid about getting into this space now. because of this massive shift and all these things that they have to now think about, right? So what are you seeing as far as the types of folks that are pursuing higher ed degrees, administrative opportunities?
And obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I think, here it's one of the most versatile degrees for a number of reasons. It allows anyone who has any interest whatsoever in working in any area of higher ed to leverage that degree to then be competitive in the market. What I mean by that is just looking at Rick's areas, there's so many different specialties and so many different nuanced opportunities. And that's just in student affairs. But you take that and you translate it across the entire university, from admissions to procurement to facilities to the healthcare environment to just general administration. Now it's Rick's turn. I think
we're saving electricity, Larry.
Sustainable campus. That it's just, in order for you to be, and the beauty here is that you get experience and be able to interact with, Rick and I work very, very closely together, but our jobs are pretty different. They intersect and our responsibilities intersect, but the missions are not necessarily the same, but they're all focused on the student experience and the safety and security and the support of our students in different ways, but there's a lot of overlap there. So I think we're seeing some non-traditional students. I've seen, students not just necessarily coming straight out of school, some who have gone elsewhere. To Rick's point earlier, we've seen some who have tested the waters in different disciplines and have landed back here. And then we've seen some that have just walked straight through and undergrad, they're RAs, they're RHDs, and they find that path, professional path, and then they enhance that with the degree. So I think it's the cart and the horse and the cart, but it's student specific. And I think the value of degree speaks for itself, and the ability for it to be applied in many different places within higher ed. To me, that's the beauty of it, is that you don't necessarily, and you can move around. We recently just hired someone, I won't say from where and from what, but her original discipline, her original place where she began in higher ed and what she's doing now are complete polar opposites. You would never expect it, but had opportunities and had the ability to advance and experience different things, and went from student affairs to something completely and totally different now, but having had that experience, and has, not from here, but has a HEA degree. So I just think it.
Larry, just as a follow-up, then we'll go to Rick. Is that something, that sort of fluidity in looking at different roles, is that something you recommend for upcoming folks, or is that an asset as far as them coming into the space with these different admin opportunities?
I think it is, and I think you have to be careful. I just had a student in my office who, a lost art, found me on LinkedIn, found me on the directory, emailed me and said, your background is similar to what I want to do. I want to come meet with you. So I love getting those emails. I'll meet with people like that all day long, and it's fantastic to see. And she's deciding between a PhD and going to law school, so it's a critical juncture for her. But I do think, to your point out, I think that as long as you're not jumping every 6 months or so, right, because that doesn't show necessarily continuity, but being exposed to different things is an asset for sure.
Great. So Rick, what are you seeing as far as types of folks pursuing? And we'll go into the next question too, because I think it'll lead into it for you, to discuss the skills and competencies of those who want to join higher ed. If you want to go into that next question as well.
Sure.
What are you seeing as far as folks, and then what sort of skills and competencies do they need?
Well, the one thing I think that still holds true, and this is what I always like to think about, we talked about the value of internships and experiences to figure out what you want to do and to know that. And the great thing about, I think, working in higher ed is your college experience is in and of itself your internship. So I actually feel that it's a good way for any prospective people who want to work in higher ed. They've gotten a level of experience, an observation at least, about what the environment's like. Certainly every campus is different, but to know this kind of better sense that that's the right fit for you is something that's important. And I will say, again, this is more from the student affairs lens, but I think this applies more broadly to higher ed. We're ultimately, many of our roles, we're a helping profession. And I think that's a huge part of what drives people to want to be in the field, and particularly in student affairs. Related to skills and competencies, those certainly have evolved over time. And I'm sure many people are aware of this, but two of the major higher ed associations, ACPA and NASPA, over the years, and last, I think in 2015, they identified a set of professional competencies that higher ed practitioners, particularly in student affairs, should have. And I know when I worked in the curriculum development of the higher ed program, we really made sure that those 10 competency areas were embedded within the curriculum so that you could graduate really with a set of good skills that could be applied to your professional work. And so what I just want to share briefly, I'm just going to highlight a couple of them because I think that they do speak to what we're looking at as important pieces. One is certainly about your professional philosophy and kind of the integrity that you bring to the job. And I always ask students when they're considering higher ed, you have to think of why do you want to do this? Because it is not for the faint of heart, I will say. Many roles in higher ed, they become even more demanding. I think the jobs require a level of professional maturity that we've not asked for traditionally. It was kind of a way to grow up, I think, a bit. And now I feel that it's a little bit different in terms of the level we're expecting in the role, given the complexities of the work. This is true in the mental health space for students. I mean, there's just a lot of risks that we're managing. Larry can speak to that directly in his work. And I think that it's just a higher level of skill, I think, that we're looking for in the role. Another element, I just think the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice are really important values that are embedded here at Stony Brook and part of the higher ed landscape. And I think this notion that we are looking to educate people because we want to make a more just society is, I think, an important value, again, that we want to make sure is part of any higher ed curriculum and what our graduates leave with. And the last thing I will say, and this is an area where beyond the counseling, the kind of the skill set about the human element of the role, one thing that I think has become even more important, and this goes back to the earlier comment about, higher ed is in a space where there are either shrinking resources, we need creative solutions, given enrollment declines of high school graduates. There are a lot of pressures on higher education to reinvent itself. And I think we need people in the field who are strategic thinkers, who know the value of a dollar and what the return on that investment is, that use data to make informed decisions. Because over the years, I mean, if I look back 28 years to now, we didn't really have good data to make informed decisions. Now we have access to that, and we need to make use of that. And certainly in our grad programs, make sure we embed that in the learning process so that you leave a program with that skill set to be able to apply that to the workplace. So those are just a few examples of how I think higher ed is evolving and the skills that we need in our employees and our team members to be successful.
Thank you, Rick. Larry, anything to add as far as skills and competencies?
Yeah, I think it's a careful balance between being able to be a member of a team and being able to work with peers towards a common goal, but also be able to be empowered and when the appropriate time and the appropriate position, be empowered to make decisions and to emerge as a leader. And I think, in my mentoring of my various teams, so now, depending on which day of the week and which org chart we're looking at, similar to, maybe 285 or 300 different people with some pretty unique missions and not necessarily moving in the same direction. But what I've been trying to do is create these, I'll say, cultures of cohesion, but also allowing people to realize that they need to swim in the same ocean, but every once in a while swim in their own lane. And I think the flexibility and having, and not everyone can do it. If you're not training your replacement, I talk about this all the time in leadership. If you're not training your replacement, if you're not building out your bench, then you're failing as a leader, and you're doing yourself and your organization a disservice. And I think a lot of, especially younger folks entering into the field, may not necessarily have that experience where they've been mentored before. So you're almost doing that on the job and on the fly, where you have to sort of evaluate that because they haven't necessarily had the opportunity to see what it's like to work in a team or to have independent, decision making. So assessing that, especially if there's not a lot of experience, if it's entry level, that's sort of be taking a risk, right? But that's also about part of making sure that you're mentoring and you're growing and you're giving opportunities for professional development. People need to be able to be mentored. Coachable people is also another, a huge skill.
I'm just curious, because I know obviously things have shifted so much in this past year. Does creativity, innovation, I know working with teams and making sure that you have you're strategic about things is it's been highlighted by both of you. Does that creativity and innovation piece come in, especially in this era? And if not, that's okay. I'm just curious what both of your thoughts are on that. Maybe
Yeah.
Rick, you go, and then Larry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a critical piece because higher ed is, as I said before, under the microscope and has to be able to be nimble and respond to these changing environments. And so think about a campus that might have declining enrollment. How do you then reverse that trend? And that's going to require innovation and creativity to come up with better solutions. I think one of the challenges is, as you were saying, it made me think about, I created a class called Leading Through COVID. And one of the things that Larry actually was a great guest speaker in the class. And one of the things that we did talk about was how do you, through a pandemic like COVID, how do you think creatively and innovatively about responding to the issues at hand? And I remember one of the questions a student asked, which was so on point, was how do you make decisions with imperfect information? And that, I think, also speaks to the importance of as you get information, you've got to think about ways to creatively respond and be innovative in the approach to how you then make informed decisions, because we're being thrown things that we've got to be able to respond to, in some immediate time frame that doesn't give you everything you need, but you've got to kind of think out of the box in every decision that we make.
Larry, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and all of that in a highly regulated, ever-changing, legally complicated environment, right? With super high stakes. So every time we turn around, there's a different three-letter agency or legislative body who's giving us more mandates, less resources. To Rick's point previously, everyone is working more with less, less resources to throw at it. So the creativity comes in. It's more of a requirement than a nice to have, because you're trying to get your teams together, oftentimes with very little notice and not even a lot of direction. We're one of 64 campuses, as everyone knows, and COVID is a good example, but just in general, just the way information kind of flows up and down the system, oftentimes you're making the best decision you can with little or no information. So creativity, spontaneity, sense of humor for sure. But all those things are very important.
As the lights go out on you. Yeah, as the lights go out on you. And just go with the flow. Just wave the hands and turn the lights back on, right?
Yeah.
And for those listening, like what we're talking about with Rick and Larry, a lot of these they could be construed as issues or obstacles that we're encountering in higher education. And I think these are some of the things that will scare folks, right? And say, wait, I don't know if I'm ready for that. But the awareness piece of it is really important, to sort of be aware of what you're getting into and the why of it. And what we get out of it, right, as higher ed administrators far outweighs, in my mind, and I think in both of your minds too, all of these things that we have to do or put up with. So I'll start with Larry on this one. How do we attract folks that are talented and passionate, people that really want to get into this space? How do we attract those folks to say, hey, it's rough, but it's still pretty good and still pretty rewarding? How do we do that?
I'm going to take what you just said, and actually we've removed it from our vernacular here. We're not allowed to say obstacle. I don't let anyone say obstacles. They're opportunities, and that's how you open up the door to recruit and retain. So recruitment is the first part. You have to make it a welcoming environment. There has to be some appreciation, or at least a little bit of a desire that you can work on over time, but at least a little bit of desire to be on board with the mission, whatever that mission is, right? So in my world, if you want to work in an environment where every single morning you're never going to know what the day is going to be like, and frankly, whatever you had planned is likely not going to happen, then we want you on our team. And I know it's similar in Rick's world as well. And by the way, that those meetings are likely going to change throughout the day, because it's constantly evolving, and every time the phone rings, it's another new, not challenge, opportunity. So there are opportunities to help keep what the overall mission is, to make this the safest, healthiest, most secure environment possible. And it's a job that I take very serious, and that everyone that works for me take serious. So that's the enticement, right? Come on in one of the most exciting opportunities that you never know what the day is going to bring. And then retention is an issue, especially now. We'll talk about, I think, just some of the remote remote working environment, learning environment, the hybrid environment. You know, I was talking to a colleague just last week, and they are actively recruiting fully remote CFOs, right? So now we're going to go fully remote with the C-suite, and it's going to be very, very difficult to keep folks in the traditional working environment. And we have some, telecommuting policies and things like that happening. But the key to retention is very simple. Take care of your people. So if you're taking care of your people and you value them and you put them first and you give them opportunities to advance, you give them opportunities to professionally develop, give them opportunities to lead, perhaps in places where they're reticent to do so. And again, I always say building a team, building your bench and training your replacement. That's how you keep a motivated team. And that's how they then attract other, we all have these networks. And whether it's a former classmate or a colleague elsewhere, you open up the door to opportunity, and then that opportunity becomes contagious. So get them in, get them excited, get them on board with whatever the mission is, and then make them happy to stay while keeping them entertained, keeping them motivated, and giving them opportunities to achieve excellence for themselves and for the organization.
And those opportunities turn into experiences which help them grow professionally, personally, all that wonderful stuff as well. Rick, question to you.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Larry said, I do think that it's a matter of also your reputation in the field, and that you want to be viewed, I'll say again for student affairs, as that you are an entity that someone says, wow, they're forward thinking, they're progressive, they're best practices, they've created new things, they're innovative. I mean, that's a reputation I think you want on the street to help encourage people to apply. But to Larry's point, I love would use the example about somebody coming in and saying, are you willing to kind of let your day play out however it plays out and not be tied to a set structure? I think it's also a matter of matching expectations, because people's expectations may be different in the job. And I think that's an important part of the recruitment process to make sure there is that match. I think in the retention, all the qualities you all talked about, but I would also add, I think building trust, communication, teamwork, as Larry mentioned before, those are just all pieces to me that make somebody want to be part of an organization. Because again, many of our roles, they are not 9-to-5 roles in the field. That's an important part of understanding, but what you get back from what you give is so much greater. And so I just think that's something that needs to, but again, it's not a field for everyone. And so I think it's trying to be realistic about what the field is. Still valuing work-life balance and making sure, people take a vacation, that they actually kind of do self-care. There are important aspects of it, but I think the field does require a level of, tenacity, I will say, of just ability to kind of roll with things that I think has been unprecedented in the last 2 years, that we've never faced before.
And you're really talking about organizational culture and that sort of positive organizational culture, and the attraction is that this is something that is unpredictable but can be really rewarding at the same time, right? So Rick or Larry, actually, either one of these, and you touched on a little bit, Rick, so maybe we'll start with you. How do we maintain that balance with student workforce needs when we're in these remote hybrid environments within higher educations? How do we maintain that balance? And I know you've mentioned earlier the mental health aspect too. So if you could speak to that, and Larry, chime in too as well.
So this is my favorite question of the night, because I think it's so fascinating to kind of dissect where we are. And so there are so many layers to this. And one important piece is that the idea of remote work, and I'm so glad in higher ed that we have now busted the myth, this notion that you can't be productive working virtually or remotely. And I think that COVID forced the change, but it proved both, I think, to corporations and higher ed that you can be very productive. I have a lot of friends and colleagues, who work in corporate work. They're not bringing them back because they're making even more money. So why would we do that? But I think what's going to be so interesting for higher ed is, especially in areas of higher ed where, and Larry used the example of somebody being able to work fully remotely as a CFO. IT, HR, these other functions that maybe you don't need to be on site. And again, and because we're competing not just in the higher ed space for these roles, but in broader industries. So how that plays out will be very telling, and we're going to need to be, I think, be very flexible and nimble, because we're going to lose out on good candidates in that space in higher ed. So that has completely been a 180 shift in the way that we've operated before. I will say in the student affairs space and to the mental health part and other areas, one of the challenges that I know in the student affairs work that I do and our team, we've had many discussions about how do we balance student needs with maybe what staff would like to do, and how do we work through this in this remote environment. And so we've come to a point where we kind of look at things like density on campus. And so based upon the number of students on campus, that really needs to drive what our presence is on campus, as well as the notion that let's see what our consumer wants. What does the student want? And again, while we force the shift because of COVID to offer telecounseling, telemedicine, virtual career appointments, virtual advising appointments, all those pieces, and literally websites switched on a dime to go into that, and in many cases were seamless. It was incredible. Now we're saying, okay, how do we balance the two, and what do students want? So again, we're trying to be data driven on student requests for appointments, for example, and trying to meet those needs, because maybe a student wants to be in their pajamas in their residence hall and they don't want to trek over for a career advising appointment. And you know what? That's fine. I think we can accommodate that. So this is allowing us, I think, some really creative opportunities to think about our work. But I will also say too, and this is a part of joining higher ed, there needs to be a recognition that campuses like Stony Brook and other campuses that are truly in-person experiences, there's something that is missed if it's only online when you're trying to build community in that in-person space. So in the end, I guess the word I'll say is it's balance. And we just have to figure out the right balance to make sure that we're supporting students where they are and what their needs are, but also trying to, think about creative technologies and ways that we can, rework our operations even to actually be even more efficient, I think, than we have before.
Yeah, and I love, not everybody says this in higher ed administration, but listen to what the students want. Is the moral of a lot of what you were saying there, and have empathy and understanding for them. Larry, anything to add to Rick's point?
I just want to quickly take it to the other extreme. Well, first saying I do like, that COVID doesn't necessarily have to be a total negative. We have some great takeaways, things that worked, right? The virtual office hours, the virtual telehealth and telecounseling, those should never go away, right? Even if they're complements to existing face-to-face components of that campus life. But the other side of that coin is managing an organization within an organization where that's happening, but there is no ability to be remote or to be hybrid. So, and that's the unenviable position that I'm in. Bus drivers, police officers, fire marshals, there is no remote work. So being able to see what the future of that workforce looks like, and trying to have the balance, modifying hours and making less appearances. That's the challenge, while they're not peers, but their colleagues in other places are, telecommuting 1, 2, 3, in some cases they were fully remote. There's the potential for there to be, two classes and two different rules. And it makes for employee burnout and stressors that come in it, the environment that they're used to being in traditionally, while others around them are in a non-traditional environment. So that's some of the, I'll say, the post-COVID effects that we're seeing now. And it's going to be a challenge that's not going to go away anytime soon. It'll be certainly as the emergence of hybrid or remote, continues to be enhanced. They don't have the option of working from home. So it's just something.
Can I just add to what was said earlier about the recruitment aspect? I think in my career in higher ed, this has been the biggest disruption to the labor force that I've seen. And I think that that's going to play itself out, because we even wonder as we recruit for positions, Larry mentioned many of the areas that report up to him are all on site. And if there are a lot of remote opportunities companies are offering, does that then drive people to different fields entirely? I think there's going to be a seismic shift and again, does that then change rate of pay? Does that change how we restructure positions? I think we're just at the beginning point us seeing some modifications. And we've even thought within student affairs roles, how do we advertise those to make them attractive to people? Because if the rest of the group is doing something that's of more remote and we're not, we may lose good candidates. So I think it's a little wait and see what others are doing first before you jump in. But it's also just trying to serve the student population that you have. And so it's going to be one of the biggest challenges we faced, I think.
Yeah, and if you look at any of the research and some of the studies that are going on, the mindset has shifted. It's not shifting; it has shifted to a preference to remote working environments, and the salaries are really close between remote and face-to-face work. For the first time, I think remote work has actually just jumped above average-wise, median-wise. So there's one more question. I actually want to throw in a question here, just in light of what both of you are talking about. Have you seen a shift in leadership, like styles, approaches, personnel, because of this sort of different, transformed higher education space? Have you seen a different leadership come into play, whether that be style or personnel?
I think both, right? I think to Rick's point just now, the shift has happened and will continue to happen. You may people completely abandoning their career field for an opportunity because it works better with their family. It works, but it's a better life-work balance. It's just a better environment. But the leader in higher ed has been 3 times the charm. So
I think Larry's doing this to emphasize his point, right? He just wants to really drive home that point. And it's effective, though, I have to say, very effective.
The leader in higher ed has been challenged, whether COVID was a significant issue in your state or not. I think if you're in this business anywhere in the country and internationally as well, it has changed. It has tested your leadership style and your leadership ability, and frankly, tested your wherewithal to stay. It's been, and Rick has been in that role longer. Certainly my most challenging time professionally in any place that I've been. But I do think that it will continue to be a challenge because you're competing with convenience, and if folks can take convenience, it's not a matter of work ethic. It's a matter of what makes sense. I think society reevaluated itself and really took an introspective look at what they value. And when you're locked down and you're living in a very, very alternate reality, you take stock in what's important to you. So I think that will have an impact, has an impact on who we have and the type of leaders that we have in the positions.
Rick, anything to add?
Yeah. I wanted to add that, and really COVID, again, just to note that it was such a defining moment for so many of us in terms of the work that we do. And the one part, again, that I'm silver lining that I'm grateful for, and Stony Brook was a model example of this. I've never seen such teamwork because in essence, you were required to. You couldn't possibly manage the scope and scale of that issue independently in your own individual department. It could never, a campus could not open in that manner. And so I have to say for myself, and one of the benefits of having this team environment is that I got the chance, and we all learned a lot about each other's operations. I feel like I know so much more about all areas within the university than I ever have, because you get very focused on your area of responsibility. And so this was, so I actually hope that if what happened at Stony Brook is replicated on other campuses, that I hope that in fact that creates models of much more collaborative leadership to solve other problems. So there were some positive pieces to me to come out to really work as a collegial team in solving some of these huge issues.
Yeah, and as I thought of a question and you answered it as it came to my mind. Has this changed both of you as leaders? Or how have you changed as leaders? And Rick, you started to answer that. Anything else to add to that piece? And Larry, then to you.
I think it's put us all to the test that we never expected. I mean, again, Larry's work, I think he deals with such high does big challenges in the role of risk management and all his prior work. I think at student affairs, we have challenges that I would say we have emergencies and some crises that we deal with, but nothing to this degree in terms of the length and magnitude of it. And to be honest with you, I mean, and I can speak for a lot of people who were involved with this, it was tiring. It was nonstop. You kept saying, when is the light at the end of this tunnel going to happen? But I also feel like I can look back and I think have a more positive response to your question. I know I grew tremendously as a result of it, where I'm going back to the earlier point about making decisions when you have imperfect information. I've learned that that's actually okay. And you know what? You're going to make the best decisions you can with the information you have. And you're not perfect, and you just keep trying, and you will modify as you need to go. And you learn not to be so fixated on a singular solution. There are many ways to solve problems. And I think, and going back to the point about team, the most critical part, it takes a team of experts from different areas to come together, each providing a piece of the puzzle to the solution.
Great. I love that collaborative leadership part you mentioned earlier too. So key. Larry?
Rick, I sort of joked around and, people say, "Oh, how'd you do during COVID?" I said, "I've been training for this day my whole life." This is it. Only half joking. But he's right. It's been exhausting. It still is exhausting. It's scaled back a little bit, but we're still tomorrow morning at 8:30. He and I and others will be, having our weekly meetings. So I think it really it crushed the perfectionist in all of us, where you had to do exactly what Rick said, make many, many decisions, sometimes with no information, let alone just, imperfect information. So I'll take that, and I think we'll continue to grow. I'm thankful for having had the opportunity to be able to be in a position to work with the teams that I have and continue to. And I also agree, there's people that I've met and I knew, on campus, but never had the opportunity to work as intimately as we did. And I think that too has made the entire leadership team at various levels just that much more versatile and that much more resilient.
And I hope folks listening understand the value of this too, because this is part of it too. Sharing thoughts, sharing ideas, sharing experiences is a big part, not just what we're showing you here, but amongst each other, that whole collaborative piece, and learning from each other, learning from things that worked well, things that didn't work as well as we hoped, all that piece, right? So last question, then we have a number of Q&A questions. We'll try and answer a couple of those as well in the last 10 minutes or so. Higher education, what is it going to look like future forward? And this is a loaded question, right? Because who knows? But what, in your mind, Larry, we'll start off with you. What's higher education going to look like future forward?
I think, and I was trying to keep track of some of the questions in the Q&A, so I'll maybe half answer one of those because I think it's related. I think you're going to see many more institutions, while realizing the value and embracing the value of the face-to-face on-campus experience. I think we're going to see a lot more online and remote as not the sole option, because I think that's a bad business practice. We certainly have plenty of institutions that are online only, but I really think that both the consumer and the provider have realized that it can be done. Certainly if you have more time. HEA program is a great example of that. So I think you're going to see exponential increases in requests and demand for other than traditional, brick and mortar. It was the trend was happening anyway in a lot of spaces, but COVID certainly accelerated that.
Rick?
I'm going to ditto that. That was on my list, Larry. And I actually also think online has just become more mainstream. It's become acceptable. Now, before it was viewed as second class, I think it's viewed differently now. And people want flexibility. So I think that's one piece of it, and it is going to be challenging for campuses to determine, can they be all things to all people? And that's going to become another part of the equation to answer. A few other quick things I just wanted to highlight. One, I do think higher ed, because of shrinking enrollments at some campuses, I do think higher ed is going to go through a consolidation period. It's interesting, when COVID first hit, I thought that would be the first time that would happen because of CARES Act money and federal aid that actually then kind of reversed it and kept people kind of solvent. But I think that is inevitable, and where population growth is in, say, Florida, Texas, other areas, I think that may see growth, but I think other areas are definitely going to see shutdowns and consolidations over the next, I would guess, the next 10 years. Two other things I wanted to mention. One is about micro-credentials. I think that is absolutely something that will continue to grow. This whole notion that while a college degree in hand is valuable, I think industry, and I know Mariana's on this, so she can speak to this better than I can, but it's this notion that you have to demonstrate skills and competencies to employers. And these micro-credentials, I think, through LinkedIn profiles and everything we have, is going to continue to be something, because in the end, and I've said this to my higher ed class before, I've posed the question, what's going to drive higher ed out of business? And what drives higher ed out of business, if an employer drops from their job requirements a bachelor's degree. And so that's what's holding up higher ed, those job requirements. And so if they don't feel the value in that, that is going to shift to a more competency-based model. And so we have to make sure that our degrees have value. Last couple of things, just mental health and wellness, I think is going to continue to be a huge priority. I think students coming into college, there's just a lot of societal issues that are not being addressed that I think create a lot of the issues that then higher ed has to help solve. So that isn't changing. And the last thing I just want to say is that and maybe it's more of a hope of what I'm hoping is that we will continue to strengthen study abroad opportunities and this whole international space for higher ed. Obviously it hit pause for a while, but I'm hoping that gets re-energized, because that's, I think, a way that higher ed is going to grow, and we'll learn, on a global scale by creating more international partnerships across campuses as well.
Well said. And I think the evolution of this online experience is what's going to, and that responsiveness to student needs. I know at SPD, we do a lot of that workforce development, workforce connections, non-credit options for to respond to industry needs, all that stuff. And that's really key, really important for the survival of higher ed in general. We have a number of questions here too. We don't have a lot of time left. Let's see. I'm just going to scroll through these real quick. Any that jumped out to either of you that you want to pull out of this number of questions here? I think you could both see these too. This is actually a good one here. What advice would you give to some? They're all good questions, but this is one I think applies to some of the stuff we're talking about. What advice would you give to someone who might be stepping into a new environment, new team to supervise, particularly recognizing the opportunities, thanks to Larry, in HEA right now? So what would advice you give to someone stepping into a new environment or new team to supervise?
I mean, I would, sort of reiterate what I said before. I think it's first impressions are only made a first time. I think you need to really establish a baseline culture of what your expectations are. If, assuming in this case you're the supervisor and you have someone new to the team. It's an ever-changing dynamic environment, but there needs to be level setting early on. And this is just a good management practice. It's hard to evaluate literally and figuratively, an employee's performance if they don't know what the expectation is. So I think a good open dialogue, transparent expectations, maybe, have them, identifying fears and concerns up front. That's not just necessarily at the interview. The interview is just a day in the life. Once they're on the team, those questions that they had are still there. So getting it all on the table, first meeting up front and really understanding, setting out what your expectations are, and maybe finding out and being able to, as quickly as possible, identify strengths and weaknesses and put them in opportunities where their strengths can be highlighted to motivate and to encourage, but also put them in uncomfortable positions to allow them the opportunity to make mistakes and to be guided and mentored and to grow. Because if you're stuck doing the same thing every day and you're really, really good at it, that's nice. It's not good for the individual, and it's not good for the organization.
Rick, anything to add to that? I have the second question, if not.
No, go to the next one. It's fine. Yeah.
All right. So as a student now, some of the draw, this is from Dylan, to higher education administration is working with students and having that direct impact, some of what to which we spoke to, right, as a really important piece to us and a rewarding piece. as someone moves up into more administrative positions and becomes less student facing, if that's true, does that impact evolve? And if so, how does it evolve?
Well, I love that question because my view has been as you move into higher positions, administratively in higher ed, your student contact is your choice. And certainly, at different levels of organizations, your job may, in the description, may inevitably have much more direct student contact, but you make that choice. And so I think it is a balance. The one thing that I would say in my career as I've moved into different roles, there is a point at which you have to look more broadly beyond just the individual student and say, what am I doing that's impacting the entire student body in a positive way that maybe I couldn't do on an individual basis? So that's, I think, the exciting part of when you built up skills and experience and say, I've got a great idea. If I'm in that leadership role, I'm going to implement this and it's going to have this major positive impact on the campus. So in other words, your leadership experience actually has a much greater effect because of the decision that you just made. So you have to think of it in that broader context. But certainly that individual student contact, it helps keep me grounded and understand what's happening on the campus. So it may take extra effort, extra time to do that, but that's a really important part to make sure you're doing a bit of both.
So your direct contact may be less, but the scope and scale of your decisions are impacting students in a broader way. Yes?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So we have Mohammed here, who is, it sounds like an international student here. Oh, yes, he is actually. Mohammed is actually our TA in one of my undergraduate classes I teach. So welcome, Mohammed. Do the higher ed institutions like Stony Brook University, can they benefit from international talents? And if so, is there anything that could be done to help international students pursue a career in higher ed administration?
Yeah, I just want to take a stab at that because the conversation I had just a few days ago was centered around that. It's actually an international student. And I would say this, just because there are, depending on the career field, there are some regulatory, challenges or opportunities that may not necessarily be available. I would not let that dissuade you from that. And I would say seek out the help of folks here and others to try to find a way. No doesn't necessarily mean no when it comes to opportunities, right? And there's always a nuance. There's always a way to find a way to overcome that. And it's a very similar. I won't get specific, but a very similar question to the student that I had in my office just a few days ago. So I'm happy to help if that's a specific thing, but I think we need to continue to embrace the diversity of our student population and both in teaching and collaborating and then giving opportunities, right? I talk about this in my class all the time. If we're not, we don't do a great job necessarily of training our students, having them graduate, and then giving them, let's just try to keep them. Those are our product. That's our work product. Why not try to keep it here? We just invested 1, 2, 3, 4, 5+ years. To me, that's the perfect opportunity. So there's definitely a way to work around those things, Mohammed. So I would say stay encouraged and talk to folks that are here.
And particularly on campus like Stony Brook that has so many international students, students want to meet and talk with people who are like them, have common experiences. So we actually, I know, would find incredible value in the student affairs area to have more representation globally on our team.
I mean, and that it's a wonderful thing. Diversity, not just for diversity, but for unique perspectives, objective views of things. That's where the value comes in. So great thought there as well. And someone also asked, and I think you answered this a little bit. Some people were affected by COVID. Some people that had been in this industry, this area for a long time, lost their jobs because of COVID. And Rick, you mentioned that might happen even more moving forward. So what sort of, this will be our last question and then we'll wrap it up. What advice would either of you give to someone who sort of lost because sometimes whole departments were absorbed, right? That happened with COVID. So what advice would you give someone like that?
Yes, this was actually, it's interesting the question came up because in this last set of interviews that we've been interviewing candidates over the last year, it's one of the first times I can ever recall we've had candidates who were coming from schools where they were laid off because of COVID or a school closing. So I think that's going to be part of the trend. I think this requires more of an individual conversation because it depends on what your geographic flexibility is, other factors to consider. If you have geographic flexibility, it's obviously much better to do that. But I would also say while you're going through the job search to keep thinking about skills and competencies that you can build, because you don't need to be in a job sometimes to build some of the skills and competencies you see posted in higher ed job position. So that's one thing to always keep in that learning and growing and knowledge base that you're trying to build upon as well. Ultimately, I would just say it's also about networking. I mean, it's clear we say this not just higher ed, but broadly in the career space. It's who can you connect with, whether through LinkedIn or other people you know in the field, to help you then, whether it's individual conversations, just a consultation with somebody, getting career advice, talking with someone in an area you want to go into. If you want to pivot your career in a different direction, higher ed, you've got to talk to people. That's a really important part. And then again, feedback on resumes, cover letters, interviewing skills. And some people I know haven't done that in years because they were kind of settled in their role. You have to start back over that. And again, utilize our team here. Work with the network that you have to help make sure you are the strongest candidate possible. But the fact is, higher ed, the good news is, while there was a lot of shrinking going on, I think as I've looked at higheredjobs.com, there's a lot more opening up now because I think the financial health has kind of rebounded because of, honestly, federal supports help make that happen much faster.
Larry, anything to add to that? And we'll wrap it up.
The only tiny piece I would say is sort of I kind of dovetail what Rick said. Think about your individual skill set and how it might be able to be leveraged, not necessarily in the exact same way, but in a different way, in a different place that's closely aligned. And I agree. I'm looking at them. I'm getting them. Listservs are back up. Higher ed jobs is got a lot more opportunity than it did 6 months or a year ago.
And there are, when you get resumes for these positions, I'm sure there are stacks and stacks and stacks of resumes. Sometimes what sets you apart is exactly what Rick said. It doesn't hurt to reach out on LinkedIn. Hey, would you mind having a Zoom conversation with me? You may get a no half the time, but half the time you'll get a yes. And even the ability to share those experiences, share the fact that you reached out to folks can be an inroad to a potential interview or a great response to an interview question. So just keep yourself open to those opportunities for sure. Any closing thoughts, Rick or Larry? Any closing thoughts? I want to thank both of you. Like I said, I know you both very well, and I appreciate both of you. And I hope that that everybody has enjoyed this conversation, but it will live on. And I have a feeling this is going to be a really popular thing for folks to look at. There's so much to dissect here. And I'm sure we'll be doing more of these with both of you moving forward. But any closing thoughts? I'll go to Larry and then Rick.
The only thing I would say is exactly what you just said. I am always available. As I joke, I'm always only Zacharis in the directory. So if you do have questions we either didn't get to or want some one-on-one advice or don't know where to go, it might not even necessarily be in my wheelhouse, but I will find the right wheelhouse for you.
And I echo that. You're always welcome to reach out. I'm always love talking about the field, and I hope you all know that Larry and I and Al too. I think we're all really passionate about the work that we do. We love higher ed and working with students, and I hope tonight's conversation just gave you a sense of there are challenges, but they're not insurmountable challenges, and I always, when someone asks what do you do for a living, I've now learned to say I'm a problem solver. And I think if we all kind of operate under that mindset that we're here to help solve problems and make experience better for everyone, to help people reach their ultimate potential, that's the kind of work that we're passionate about, that we love to do. And we want people to join us on the journey who have that same passion. And
I'd like to emphasize, and I know both of you feel this too, despite the challenges of this space, there are so many little wins and so many feel-good things that happen on a daily basis that really, I know, drive me on from day to day. And I'm sure, knowing both of you, you have similar feelings on that too. So thank you both so much. We appreciate everybody that attended. This will be posted in a number of different places for people to watch over and over again. I'll also share, like I mentioned, with everybody who attended, We're getting a lot of thank yous, amazing discussion that you guys both did here. Thanks for sharing. So a lot of really thankful folks for such a great job that both of you did. Really appreciate your time, and thanks so much. All right.
Thank you.
Very much.